जिंदा रहने के लिए ये फासला और ये दूरी है, अब खुदा जाने और क्या क्या ज़रूरी है. This is day 9 of lockdown, and today we are here to discuss chapter 5 of Economic Survey 2019-20 volume 1. This chapter speaks about the Indian economy in the context of our export composition. See, understand one thing, when we speak about any economy, the basic aim is to generate employment because of we want prosperity in people for people. When you say employment generation in Indian context, how can we do this? The first level of questioning is which sector: agriculture, that is primary; secondary, that is manufacturing; or tertiary. We understand the concept of Levesian transformation. We have to move the surplus people who are in agriculture to manufacturing and services. India has skipped the manufacturing stage, unfortunately, and we have shifted more people, or we have shifted people and our economic structure to services orientation. This has not allowed the wealth to percolate in the larger chunk of population. So the answer is very very clear that we have to move towards manufacturing sector, strengthening the manufacturing sector. Now, once you get that answer, that manufacturing, next question comes is manufacture for whom? For the domestic market or for international market? Here the survey is again very very clear that though we need to produce for India also, however, manufacturing has to be oriented to make it export relevant or for export orientation. Now, when we speak about exports, again, the next question comes that is the world ready for another China? And is there space when already there is China dominating the world export market? Survey tells us that there are two reasons why the space hitherto occupied by China may be available for India. One is the US China trade war. Second, the labor force in China is reducing, or rather, China has high wages, the cost of labor is increasing, and because of this, there is a scope for India to expand its footprint in the labor, in the manufacturing sector, export sector for the world. Now, having decided this, does this mean that the world is ready for another China in the form of India? And then that made in China model that we have to follow, that now made in India, and then that would be sold outside. Again, this is not so. Survey clearly tells us that the model that we need to follow is that India needs to get into or participate into the global value chains. Now, these global value chains are work in a manner. For example, you take an iPhone. This iPhone, if you see, it's not made in one country. iPhone has participation of more than 6 to 8 markets or economies in its manufacturing. So batteries may come from Taiwan, other structure may come from somewhere else, raw materials come from somewhere else, and then ultimately the assembly of this iPhone occurs in China, and then they are sold throughout the world. So this is global value chains. So survey and this chapter advocates that India needs to participate in global value chains. Now, when you say India needs to participate in global value chains, there are two types of global value chains. They are buyer driven and producer driven. Uh, Out of this, survey says that India should go for producer driven global value chains, which are for a class of products called network products. The example is mobile phone or electronics. Now, what are these buyer driven chains, producer driven chains, and what India can do? What are these network products, and what steps India needs to promote its manufacturing of network products and its integration into global value chains? We are going to discuss step by step in this economic survey. So, the first thing here, uh, before we get to the questions directly, it is about the structure of Indian economy as of now. If you look at the structure of Indian economy post 1991 reforms, it has been seen that overall the export participation of India in the world, global exports, it has increased, but it is still minuscule if you compare it to China. So, for example, we have 1.7% in 2018. So that is the proportion of global exports that India contributes. It's just 1.7%. Similarly, at the same time, if you compare it with China, it is 12.8% for China. 1.7, 12.8. You can see the difference. Again, if you see the trends in Indian economy, you see that the imports of merchandise has increased in India. So after 1991, we opened up our markets, LPG. But what happens because of that? Rather than we dominating the exports, our imports have increased in value. Manufactured products. What is good is that our services exports have increased. But then, coming back to the same point that we are discussing in each lecture, the point is that services will not allow the wealth to percolate to the bottom of the pyramid, right? Highly skilled people, urban centers, and the percolation of wealth is very limited. So we need to work on manufacturing. How this can be done? So here survey presents a few questions, right? And these questions, on the basis when we start answering these questions, then the entire chapter unravels itself step by step. What are the basic questions? What type of policy interventions can help us achieve faster growth? Second, should we focus on specialization or diversification in our exports? This means what? Specialize means you use your comparative advantage and specialize in export of a particular product only, and this may be a part of global value chains, right? Or a diversification, that you produce a number of products and then you sell them into number of markets, right? Third question, the next question comes with promote strong. See, we should promote strong local linkages or global linkages. So should we develop value addition chains in the country domestically, or we should participate in the global chains? This is again a choice that you have to make. If you look at the original policy that came in Make in India, it was very clear that there was 30% offset. Even Rafale deal that was being discussed. The point is, initial policies, government of India always insisted that if foreign investment is coming in India for producing certain good, you should use the local product. So you should invest into development of domestic value chains while you are making in India. Now this is, as per this chapter, not a very first choice that you should do, right? This strategy, if you follow right from the onset of the manufacturing, it may backfire in long term, right? How we'll come to that. So rather, the survey advocates what? That we should focus on being a part of global value chain rather than focusing on only developing domestic chains, right? Survey believes that in due course of time, if you are part of global value chain, the domestic value addition networks will develop, right? How? We'll see later. And then it is also said that which are the industries that hold the greatest potential for export growth and employment generation. So which sectors should we focus on even in manufacturing? And lastly, survey tries to answer the questions about whether we should be a part of this free trade arrangements. Now this, the context is RCEP, that India did not participate into RCEP. So RCEP just is an example, but there are other free trade agreements that India has been signing with individually countries, bilaterally, or regional agreements. So that evaluation of all these agreements till now, and then what should be the India's policy in future, that has been dealt with in this chapter. So step by step, let us start discussing how we can improve our exports so as to ensure that employment generation in the country occurs sustainably and grows in future. Here, just to cut the long story short, survey says that we should focus on global value chains of network products. Now, let us first see what network products are. You can get a question on this in prelims also, and this is something that is important, extremely important for mains also. Network products are where the production processes are globally fragmented, and these are controlled by multinational corporations. So these are producer driven chains, right? Here, examples are computers, electronics, electrical equipment, telecommunication, right, equipment, and road vehicles. So, like for example, passenger cars. So these are all network products. Now, uh, ultimately, the buzzword here is, as we discussed in the initial chapter also, that what survey advocates is that we should start by integrating assemble in India for the world into the Make in India campaign, right? So this assemble in India for world, what is this? We are going to see in this chapter. If you look at page number 102, right, India's export, the heading here is India's export performance vis-a-vis China. So before moving forward to the point that what India should do, right, first we need to understand how are we different from China and what has China done differently and why we are lagging in exports. The first and foremost thing is the question of specialization versus diversification. See, what India has done is India has not specialized enough. This means we have not identified our comparative advantage. Rather, wherever is possible, in whatever sector, whatever product, we have tried to manufacture it in India and we have tried to sell it outside. You are very well aware that out of our export basket, majority of the goods are primary goods. Very few manufactured products occupy the list. So these primary goods are not something that you can aim for in future. As opposed to it, So we have not specialized. We have go for diversification in products. Also, if you look at the export destinations of India, they are also such that we have diversification in export destination also. So we sell to Africa. I mean, low income, middle income, and high income. We sell for everyone in every market. But the point is, this sounds good. There is no problem here. But the point is, where do you stress? If you compare low and middle income countries with high income countries, you will see that who have uh, who have better purchasing power capability or better consumption, it is the high income countries. Better penetration into high income markets or rich countries is something that China has done that we have not done, right? We have focused majorly on low and middle income, and our products are not valued in the rich countries. That is exactly opposite to China. A product like iPhone, right, is manufactured in China, completely assembled in China. So China targets high income countries along with other countries also. We have not done that. This is the first major difference. And second, China has specialized. So China has identified particular sectors where China uses its comparative advantage to manufacture on a large scale and then pushes it into the global chains, those products. So that we have to see here. Here, uh, the question is, if we start assemble, so that is what the entire crux is, that if you start assembly, so for example, China assembles iPhones, but if you see the entire price of iPhones, we are going to see this in the later pages, that China gets only 3% of the value of one iPhone, right, of its total value. But if you see the scale, see, Chinese model is all about economy of scale. If you see the number of iPhones that are being assembled in China, then you understand the kind of jobs China generates and the value that China generates for its economy by just assembly of iPhones. And iPhone is only one product, right? China has such hundreds and thousands of products in which China does that assembly as well as value addition, right? So this is the crux of the discussion. Next difference between India and China is low level of participation in global value chains. So here it is very, very clear that in India, we have seen that wherever we are doing well in exports, these are capital and skill intensive sectors. So the industries, the products that we are exporting well, India, these are produced in capital intensive and skill intensive industries. So when you say capital intensive and skill intensive, clearly the employment generation, even if say a particular industry is growing by 10% or 12%, the percentage conversion in employment generation because of this industry will be very less, because it is capital and skill intensive. That is where China has differed. When China started assembly of iPhones, so assemble in China, what happened is, assembly is not very highly skilled activity. So you can generate many people, many jobs, right? You can generate many jobs for many people for assembly in your country. So, and it's not like that, that even if iPhone is being assembled in China, it doesn't mean that high skill jobs are not generated. More jobs would be at the lower level, which is actually a requirement for India. But then managerial post and training post or high skill post also get as collateral. They also develop along with these low level jobs. So that is a major difference between India and China. So if you look at Chinese economy, what has China done? China focused since 1980 to 2000s on traditional labor intensive industries or labor intensive stages in production process of capital industry, intensive industries. I'll repeat again. China did two things. One, traditional labor intensive industry like textiles. So China focused on that. Traditional labor intensive industry that will generate employment. Second, even in capital and skill intensive industries, the production process is defined. So out of this production process, it identified the stages which are intensive, and then it focused on those labor intensive stages of production of capital intensive industries, right? The goods produced by capital intensive industries. I'll come back to the iPhone again. So iPhone can be considered as capital intensive and skill intensive. It can be manufactured by all automated processes. However, the assembly of iPhones is still labor intensive. So China focused on assembly part. Are you understanding? So traditional labor intensive industries and labor intensive stages in the production process of capital intensive industries, these are the two things that China focused on. Clear? And we have not done this. Now when we speak about what China has done, right? As opposed to India, you see what India has done. India has focused only on capital intensive and skill intensive industries. We are in services sector. That itself shows our priority. That is why unemployment in India is high and we have not been able to develop our manufacturing sector. If you look at the economic surveys before this, I think 2 or 3 years ago, the economic survey had given graphs and it had clearly shown that in India, if you observe, see the process of industrialization and then deindustrialization, you can see that China has industrialized very nicely, manufacturing sector, and now China is moving into services and R&D. So manufacturing in China is slowly coming down because now there is prosperity, jobs, labor cost is increasing. So China will move towards high end sectors now and leave space for manufacturing low level jobs for countries like India and other countries in Southeast Asia. This graph should peak nicely. This means it will show that you have taken ample benefit of your labor that is available in your country. So the graph should go up nicely and then start coming down, as opposed to Corona, right? Corona's graph in Italy went up nicely and came down. We speak about flattening of the curve with respect to coronavirus. We are trying to do that, but this is not just coronavirus. We have done it in industrialization also, and unfortunately, in India, if you look at the industrial development, the curve is extremely flat and it has started deindustrialization. This means the economic survey, the past economic survey clearly showed that India has started the process of deindustrialization even before we could complete the process of industrialization or completely get industrialized. Understood? And this is the problem of India. Clear? So here, now the main contrast regarding India and China, it has, I have already highlighted that China focused on labor intensive manufacturing, and China incorporated these labor intensive manufacturing processes into the global value addition chains. These are major differences between our exports, our manufacturing, and Chinese manufacturing. So China derived major benefit in context of employment generation because of these two things. Next, if you look at Indian economy, page number 106, the gray box at the top, export of refined petroleum products. This is just a case study that India, one of the major items of export in India is refined petroleum products, but that is completely capital intensive, driven by private industries like Reliance or Jamnagar industry of Reliance. So here, private sector oil refineries are the major players in refined petroleum products, which is totally highly capital intensive industry. So employment generation commensurate is not seen. Next heading, low market penetration in high income countries. This is the third difference between India and China. Low market penetration in high income countries. So we have clearly said that India sells more in low and middle income countries, whereas China has focused on high income countries also, destinations. So this has given China better value in terms of its manufacturing sector. Now the question comes on what? The question comes on, it is generally argued that China's export performance was because of its currency devaluation, right? Which it used to artificially do. Point is, the survey deals in, if you see page number 107, 5.15, the survey clearly busts this myth. That survey says that if you observe India's currency since 2000, it has consistently depreciated, but then it is not accompanied with increase in exports of India. That means you cannot just say that China's export growth or export performance is because of currency devaluation that China did, right? That may be one of the confounding factors, but uh, the steps taken by China, very nicely planned implementation of manufacturing in those particular sectors which are labor intensive and then integrating into global value chain, that was very planned and nicely done by China, implemented in China, whereas we failed to do that, right? So it is like uh, uh, India missed out on that bus at that time. So ultimately, what it says is, to just sum up, high level of participation in GVC is required, global value chains. High degree of specialization in labor intensive production activities is required. Large scale in the chosen sectors of specialization. So economy of scale needs to be implemented. And then high level of export penetration in traditional rich country markets is required. So ultimately, when we speak about the specialization and intensive, uh, what is the survey telling us? The survey is telling us that we should focus on sectors like textiles in Indian economy, and then get integrated into the global value chain. And then on page number 109, you see what they've explained. Box 3, example of gain from assembly. So iPod and iPhone. So that is what I'm saying, that if you look at the pie chart given here, it is clearly seen that of the entire value of iPod, only 3% China gains, right, in assembly of one iPod. But then, if you multiply the number of iPods that are being manufactured, you will understand the amount of money that is generated or value that is earned in China, right, and the employment that it has created. So this scale effect is absolutely necessary. Scale effect, economy of scale. Also, this survey speaks about a simple flow chart that is given on page number 110. That you participate, right? Greater participation in global value chain. What it does, it leads you to participate in the production of certain goods which have high foreign value addition in the export chain. This leads to more exports from your economy. In due course of time, it leads to generation of domestic value chains, and then ultimately it leads to disproportionately high employment generation in your economy. So this is a must for Indian economy to do according to this economic survey. Now, the next heading given on page number 110, which industries should India specialize in for job creation? So here, two major points are mentioned here. First point is India's traditional unskilled labor intensive industries. That should be the first target. So for example, textiles, footwear, right, clothing. India needs to focus on these sectors. However, in the initial part of the lecture, I spoke about buyer-driven networks and producer-driven networks. So when we speak about global value chains, there are two types of products: buyer-driven and other is the producer-driven. When you speak about buyer-driven, a footwear is like that. Now, for example, Nike or Adidas, what do they do? The entire design process, marketing process, and the third thing is here branding. So design, branding, and marketing is done in America, right? By I mean, these are service sector jobs. So very high end activities in this footwear is what: designing of the footwear, branding, and its marketing. So this is done by the developed country. Only the manufacture is subcontracted. So a developing country somewhere in Africa manufactures the Nike shoes. It comes to America. Marketing, branding, designing has occurred earlier, and then branding and marketing occurs later. So this is how this buyer driven network works. Survey says that we should invest into this, there's no doubt about it, but that should not be the focus. Emphasis should be on producer driven. So for example, take iPhone, electronics, mobiles, or automobiles. So what is here? The designing can occur anywhere, but then the manufacture itself will generate a value addition chain or value chain globally. And then survey says that these are network products, right? So they create a network of production throughout the globe. So 6 to 8 countries can participate in its manufacturing. And then survey says that we should identify our comparative advantage and be a part of this global value chain in producer driven network, in these network products which are controlled by multinational corporations. Clear? So 5.21, major hub for final assembly. China has become a major hub for final assembly. So India should become a major hub for final assembly of various network products, right, which are controlled by global value chains and the multinational corporations. So specialization should be based on comparative advantage. Now here 5.22, electrical machinery. If you say network products, now here from here onwards, the survey, this chapter speaks about the importance of network products in global economy. I'll not get into the technicalities. 6 major categories are given in table 1. Just go through that. But then if you see the point 5.23, it clearly shows on an average network products account for 42% of the world manufactured exports. So slowly and steadily, these network products are increasing in their value in the global exports. That is why we should not miss this bus and we should get into the value addition chains. Now, Asia's share, if you see this global chains in these network products, East Asia is leading. China, Japan, and all, Korea's. Southeast Asia came later. They are also participating. Only 2 major countries are such that which are negative growth. We have a negative growth in these network products: India and Indonesia, right? India and Indonesia. Most of the other countries are becoming part of these chains and deriving benefit out of it positively. So it is clearly seen in here 5.24. that India's exports of network products, it's very, very less. It has increased, but it is minuscule as compared to the East Asian and Southeast Asian countries. Now, 113, before discussing here it has been divided. I mean, what countries uh, participated in these global chains of network products early, and what came later, and who are laggards. So here it is believed that India has missed the bus. Rather, I believe that it's not just we have missed the bus. This is not just one case, right? On a just lighter note, you've seen that in Hindi movies, Bollywood, it's always romanticized, right? That the train is moving, and then the protagonist or the hero or heroine runs behind the train. You saw DDLJ, right? And then at the end you jump onto the train, and that is something like heroic. That is okay in movies, but in Indian economy or in economics, in practical life, it has huge consequences, right? So we have missed the bus, missed the train earlier. And here, from this data, it is very clear that when all most of the East Asian and Southeast Asian countries are deriving benefit out of this network products and their related global value chains, India is totally out of it, right? Rather, unfortunately, we have just, not just unfortunately, by design, acts of commission as well as omission, we have become major importers of assembled network products, which is negative, right? Having such a huge labor and human capital, we should have been exporting or being part of value chain into this global value chain into this network products. So early entrants were Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines. Late entrants were in Thailand, Vietnam, China, and laggards are India and Indonesia. Right now, here there is one thing that and this chapter points out, and I would like to give an example of. It is about uh, automobile sector in India. If you observed, right, this is one example in India where you have become a part of network products in global value chain. Just the story goes like this. uh, Long back, right? This India in automobile sector, Maruti and Suzuki came together. This is very long ago. What happened is, initially Suzuki used to give technology, design, even all the products were manufactured there only. In India, Maruti Suzuki joint venture, they just used to import everything and then assemble in India. This is what exactly the survey is saying, and we did it, right? Just in one sector, roads, this automobiles. So what we got is, all assembled products were brought in India. All raw materials and products were brought in India, manufactured parts, and then the car was just assembled in India. That was the beginning. Now look at Maruti Suzuki today. Maruti Suzuki has come up with niche products. Like, for example, I'll give an example of Baleno. It's a hatchback, right? A luxury hatchback that is being manufactured under the brand name Nexa by Maruti Suzuki. This Baleno is 98% made in India. So we started with importing all the components and then only assembling in India, Maruti Suzuki. We have reached at a stage where, in while just assembling, what happens is domestically, and this is how participation in global value chain allows the development of domestic manufacturing and domestic value chain. Maruti started bringing in parts and then assembling the car, but in due course of time, Maruti and other players in the economy, Indian economy, realized that there are certain parts which could be manufactured simply in India also, right? So they started manufacturing those parts and then supplying this to Maruti group. What happened? Today 98% of Baleno is made in India, and this Baleno is made only in India, but it is sold in Europe also. So today India has become a hub where we not only design, we create the entire structure in India, and then that is sold globally. So this is a classic example of success story, how uh, starting with assembly, we can later move on, upgrade ourselves, promote ourselves on the global value chain, and then start supplying for the world, right? Making and supplying in the world. So this is a key learning that we need to follow in other sectors also. So here, this example is given in 5.27. Here, after that, it is also said that mobile phone assembly also India has done well. We are assembling, I think, mobile manufacturing, India is second in the world after China. So box 4, learning and learning from the integration into global value chain by Indian automobile industry. Go through that complete example I've already explained here. Assembly of mobile phones is given in box 5. India toppled Vietnam to become second largest manufacturer of mobile globally following China in 2018. So this is also very good example, and rather this should be replicated in other sectors also. Now here there is a very interesting observation that the survey does, page number 116. It's about pattern of entry. Now how do you enter the global value chains, right? We are speaking about India should enter global value chains. How? So there is an interesting term here. It is called wild geese flying model. Now, if you have observed, and I bet each one of you has observed that when the geese fly in the sky, they make that V-shaped structure, right? So, and if you closely observe, right, what happens is the in that V, when the geese are flying like an arrowhead, the particular birds they keep on changing their position. So one who is at the end of the V starts moving up and ultimately goes to the uh, apex, and then from there comes back again. So this is the pattern which is developed in context of participation in global value chain by Kaname Akamatsu, who is a Japanese economist. What he says is, if you observe a geographical region like say Asia, what happened? Japan was one of the first countries, or rather the first countries, to enter this value chains globally. So Japan became the lead geese. Now the lead geese takes on the major uh, resistance of air, and then allows the other geese to develop because of its own experience. So what did Japan do? Japan, the lead goose, provided capital, technology, and managerial know-how to the follower geese countries. So after that, in East Asia and Southeast Asia, other countries followed suit after Japan. So this inverted V is the model of participation in global value chains. But this inverted V can be drawn for two things. One, for assembly, and second, for parts and components manufacture, right? So first which will come? Assembly will come. So say Vietnam. So Vietnam after Japan gets into the assembly of this network products. Slowly and steadily, Japan will move to the apex. It will move back. Why? Because now the way we speak about China, that China has become an economy which is not just assembling now. It has graduated up, promoted itself, and it is going into R&D, designing, quaternary, quinary activities. So assembly space will be vacated by China in due course. So that, for example, Japan goes to the apex, comes back, leaves that space, vacates the lead space. Vietnam will take that space. So now it is time for India. India should enter now and move uh, in line to go to the apex. Now China at this stage, why we say we should replace China? China is at the apex now. That is called the inflection point. That China is now leaving that space of assembly, right? But in manufacturing of parts and components, China has still not reached the apex, right, or the inflection point. So we, India, will have the apex vacated by China in near future in assembly of network products globally. So we should take that space. So assembly, assembled end products, and parts and components. These are two ways. Here various charts are given on page number 117 and 118. Go through the charts. It clearly shows the pattern being followed by every country. And here we can see in India, uh, we are saying that we should take the space vacated by China. But unfortunately, if you see the maps here, the charts given here, it is clear that India, this assembly, in the context of assembly, India is not moving towards inflection point or the apex. Rather, India is moving back, though not completely reaching the apex, before reaching the apex. So we need to reverse this negative trend and move towards the apex of this inverted V, right? Next, page number 119, potential gains in employment and GDP. So what the chapter here is trying to tell, that what would be the potential gain if India follows this pattern nicely and becomes part of GVCs in network products. This is technical. The charts and numbers are given here. You can go and go through this all. Page number 120, table 4 is important. So the projections are given, but these are just indicative. Page number 121, are free trade agreements beneficial? So now the last important point about this chapter, are free trade agreements beneficial? See, it is general understanding that India has not gained much by participating into free trade agreements after liberalization. It is argued that, for example, say in context of Thailand, it is argued that we have become major importers rather than exporters. So we sign a free trade agreement with someone. what happens is rather than we exporting, we start importing everything, and that benefits the other party, and our trade deficit goes on increasing, right? That is also the context that why India did not participate into RCEP. So we are concerned about our manufacturing, the producers in our country, and we feel that the foreign products would be dumped into our economy, and our domestic manufacturers may not be able to compete with the competition or the products which are brought in by Southeast East Asian and Southeast Asian neighbors. Now the point is, this part of survey in this chapter uses multiple methods to calculate and prove that this is not so. Overall, I'll just tell you the crux. The crux is we have gained overall in terms of this free trade agreements. The gain cannot be only seen in mercantilist or transactional view in terms of how much deficit or how much profit or loss. It has also led to development of these networks, value addition networks in your economy, and generation of employment. So in that context, it argues for more participation in such free trade arrangements, if not bilateral, at least regional in nature. But this cannot be done without bringing reforms in our economic structure. So if you are not capable of making utilizing your comparative advantage and making something which can allow you to be a part of global value chain, then it will backfire, right? So here page number 122, figure 16 is important. That it is given on page 122, 123. All the figures are given. Various free trade arrangements of India, various agreements are mentioned here. Charts are given in like figure 17, overall impact of trade agreements on imports and exports. There is no doubt that trade agreements have resulted into huge increase in imports in India. Exports have not proportionately increased. There's no doubt about it, right? And that too, wherever we have taken benefit, that is in services sector, which is again, as we have discussed earlier, not very that's not a complete answer to our economic woes or problems. So here, what the survey is trying to tell you is, ultimately, through trade agreements, India has gained, but we need to work on our comparative advantage and participate in network products, global value addition chains. Now, lastly, page number 124, way forward. It is saying that in short term and medium term, what should India do? India should, uh, the objective should be, India's current strength lies primarily in assembly in network products. So in short and medium term, India should focus on assembling the network products in India. In long term, we should promote ourselves, move up the global value chains so as to manufacture the parts and components also, right? So which will generate jobs across the sectors in India. Uh, Here, 5.39, the various targets are given, how much it can mean in terms of GDP and employment. Just go through that. 5.40 says that there are concerns that we may be locked in the only assembly stage, but that is not seen. We have seen already in Maruti example that no country gets locked up at only assembly stage. Once you do assembly nicely, you can promote yourself up the chain depending on how nicely you worked on the manufacture of products and components. So ultimately, page number 125 sums up the policy prescription for India in this sector. First is import tariff rates for intermediate inputs. We have to bring it down. Rather, the issue of countervailing, this inverted tariff structure. India has that problem of inverted tariff structure that doesn't allow us to move into the value chain. So what is the policy prescription here? Import tariff rates for intermediate inputs should be zero or negligible so that assembly can be done in India. Second, we need to create a proper ecosystem by doing reforms, right? Ease of doing business. Third, ongoing reform measures regarding, say, for example, flexibility of labor laws. Absolutely necessary if you really want to get into this value chain, because you have to be, if you want to enter the global value chain, your product has to be competitively priced. If it is to be competitively priced, your production process, the cost of production should go down. So labor laws need to be more flexible. Then it also says that proactive FDI policy is necessary because FDI also brings in technology, managerial skills, and it also allows you to be a part of that global change. Next, it says that assembly processes require not only trainable, low cost, unskilled labor, but also a lot of middle level supervisory manpower. So you have to work on human capital, and not only human capital, we have a lot of it, demographic dividend as we call it, but we have to work on skills, and that is a major problem in India, skills, right? And then 5.42, the last policy prescription is low level of service link cost. So this is the ease of doing business, transportation and all this communication. Here, the cost should be low, and the speed efficiency should be very high. So ultimately, this chapter tells us that the answer to India's economic problem lies in export-driven economy in products which are called network products, which can allow India to efficiently integrate its economy in the global value chains. So, assemble in India should become integral part of Make in India. With all this, I end this session. Very good day. Thank you.